need an introduction, but I'm going to do it anyway. Okay. So, and she is a visiting professor of computer science and engineering at Texas A&M, where she directs the Center for Robot-Assisted Search and Rescue. And Robin is a founder of the field rescue robotics and human-robot interaction. She serves many executive boards and national academies and defense boards. And Robin is most famous for putting robots into disasters. And, actually, I got to know her research because she gave a wonderful TED talk about her work on using robots in disaster relief and disaster rescue. And I think that TED talk gets millions of views. Right? So it's really cool. As you can see from Robin's first slide, and you're gonna expect many cool robots and many cool robot videos from her talk. So without further ado, yeah, Robin, word to yours.
Well, thank you. And as we say at Texas A&M, howdy. So robots, COVID, Texas. Well, we're here in Texas. We got a lot of robots, and isn't it nice to be seeing each other again in person? And for those of you on Zoom, sorry about that. It's great to be back in person. It's great to be back in person. And so let's see what's happening. All right, and as you said, I do disaster robots, but I'm going to be talking about robots used for COVID for the past 2 years. And that may seem kind of a stretch, but disasters, we use the all hazards approach. A pandemic is just another disaster if you're an emergency manager. So we'll look at that. So we started right after the WHO, World Health Organization, declared the pandemic back in 2020, in March 14th. And there was this cute op-ed said, where are the robot overlords when we need them the most, right? Because everybody's locked in, nothing can be done. And so we said, game on. We rose to the challenge. Where are they? And so for 2 years, we've looked with funding from 2 different National Science Foundation grants looking at different things. And we have found that there is at least 420 discrete instances of robots being used for things directly because of COVID that wouldn't have been used before in 53 countries. And we've done analysis by the work domain, by the date, by the country, the modality, morphology, technical maturity, legal issues, all of these things, and we have a great team that's still working on this. Dr. Angela Clendenin from Public Health, Dr. Paula DeWitt from the law school, and Dr. Jason Motes from the Emergency Management Extension Service, and some wonderful, great students. So I'm not gonna be able to talk about all of that in 30 minutes, but let's go for it. Let's see what we get. So 420 instances, how do you get data on something, particularly in year 1 when everything was so new? So we went to social media. We also monitor all the scientific literature. Our rules of engagement were pretty straightforward. If they said they were using a robot, even if it was a Lego robot that was being used as a hand dispenser, we counted it as a robot. But it had to be in the field. It actually had to be in the field. It had to have proof that it was actually being used by real people for at least 1 day, and we would keep that in there. Now, one way to think about pandemics is to think about them from a medical viewpoint. And I was part of a team that did think of it that way: prevention, detection, diagnosis, treatment, and recovery. And then it's great if you are trying to do medical robotics. But what we wanted to do is we've seen it beyond medical. And so what we did is use a clustering technique to look at socio-technical domains. Not just medical would be one, but let's look at public safety, things like that. And so you start breaking it up with the way Amazon might use robots for warehousing is going to be different than a hospital is going to use robots. It's a different set of constraints, a different set of monetary factors, a different set of regulations. So we've looked at that. So year 1, so the first year, January 24, 2020 was the first time we have any reports of a robot being used. It was in Seattle, one of the Seattle hospitals. Somebody came in, they thought they might have Ebola, something bad, and they said, nope, send the teleoperated robot in to start the analysis there. So what we found in year 1, 340 instances in 48 countries, and the countries are in blue. The top 8, and we'll come back to this in year 2 to look how that changes: US, China, India, Great Britain, Italy, South Korea, Spain, and Singapore was tied with Thailand. Singapore had the first use, so we broke the tie that way. Why 8? 8 works really great on PowerPoint slides, on being able to keep up with and work with. But you can also see how it tails off pretty quickly after that. All right, so here's what we expected. We expected pretty much everything was going to be clinical care, stuff in the hospitals, a little bit of public safety, the public health department doing the quarantine enforcement, that sort of, and a little bit left over. No, this is what we got. Clinical care was about a quarter. Public safety was actually uses reported were more. Now, you know, the data's noisy, we've got all these other things, but overall as a trend, kind of interesting. Continuity of work and education was large, laboratory supply automation, quality of life, and the non-hospital care. Quarantine camps were popular in Asia, common mechanism for us in the United States, and in Europe, taking care of people in elder care nursing homes. Was the purple. So let's what they look like. Public safety was the big winner, and the intensity is relative proportion to the number of instances. Quarantine enforcement, yes, police all over the world were sending drones to find people having a good time during the lockdown and to yell at them, because now you can buy a little attachment to do that, a little speaker. Okay, so that was the big one. And the second largest was to take agricultural drones and start spraying everything. Entrances to subways, park benches, things like that. And that persisted until the World Health Organization said, you know, the drainage, you're killing all the fish and wetlands. Could you please stop, because it doesn't work and you're having environmental impacts. And everybody went, oops, never mind. Okay, clinical care, disinfecting the point of care. World's dumbest robots is an autonomous robot. You either reel it in or it's got just enough slam that it can make it in a door. It sits there for 45 minutes, zip, 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 kills everything, about 99%, doesn't catch anything that's underneath. But one person can come in, wipe the rails. It's pretty obvious what it is. And of course, hospital rooms are in fact pretty sparse. I mean, we've all seen how there's nothing in there. Speeds up, wonderful help to help turn over rooms, to help keep things going, to help the surge, particularly when the janitorial staff was also getting ill and not being able to show up at work. Observational telepresence, iPad on a stick, right? You're seeing those flow, and those became public. But delivering an inventory, you're thinking about, look at the beautiful work here at UT Austin with Moxie, coming out of Andreas Thomas's group. So we see all of that. The big surprise was continuity of work and education was so that this is people, individual people are non-traditional robot users suddenly acquiring robots. So sure, every school that could thought about it, large companies started building the disinfection robots, okay? Same thing with telepresence, but we also saw a huge spike in warehouse and process automation for worker shortages, saying we've got to do this because we're running out of workers. It's not that, you know, it's because of COVID. It wasn't inevitable. Laboratory and supply chain automation. We had thought this was going to be the big other. It wasn't. Laboratory and supply chain automation, primarily delivery, and that is delivery of samples. You don't put your lab to run all the samples next to the nice hospitals in the nice part of town. You put those over the warehouse district by the airport over there, and so you lose a lot of time shuttling back and forth. Drones were great. They worked wonderful, particularly since everybody was in lockdown. There was nothing to hit, so all the aviation agencies in those countries said, sure, go have at it. Handling infectious materials inside was another one. Quality of life. Delivery of food became important as that, oh, we're just going to be down for 2 weeks. You know, kept stretching on. There was a report from a set of people in the UK that said they thought at the first of it, they thought the idea of delivery robots was the stupidest thing they ever heard of. It's just this one of these Silicon Valley things. And then when they started, everybody started running out of milk for the kids. And even that little small one that was coming around to the neighborhood 2 thumbs up. They loved it. Of course, there's all sorts of fun things people were doing. In New York, a person had met somebody he wanted to date, but hadn't asked him for a date, but she lived across the street, so he flew his drone over to talk and ask them for a date and promised that the first date after the lockdown would be. And another one is somebody walked their dog with their drone from their balcony, and just sure, okay, got it. And the non-hospital care, that delivery to quarantine, we saw a lot of that. You're there, you're in this hospital, in a hotel room. It comes to your door, beeps, you pull it off, press the button, it goes to the next one, beeps, and so on and so forth. Big thing here, I think, is really cool. Not replacing people. These were public safety was to enforce the public health policy. The clinical care was all about protecting the healthcare workers and handling the surge and maintaining and keeping a hospital going. Continuity of work and education, again, protecting the workers and the customers, trying to make up for shortfalls and worker shortages, and handling the surge, because a lot of now all of a sudden everybody had to get these online orders through. Quality of life was quality of life. Laboratory and supply chain automation, again, handling the surge in demand for all of these samples to be run. And then the non-hospital care, again, trying to get, Italy did a very good job of trying to work with the elders. So there's a lovely paper on that. Now, if we look in terms of morphology, the ground robots, majority, aerial. Ooh, look how many aerial, very sizable amount of aerial robots, 2 marine robots, 1 to go out and check oil rigs out in the North Sea, and 1 to do something similar in the United States. So that was really interesting to see that split. And we saw 29 discrete use cases. So they would have some difference in the workers or the interactions, as well as the cost, the purpose, things like that. So we saw that. And if you look at those work cases, you can kind of glom them together. 85 instances at about 14 of the cases had something to do with disinfection. And notice you saw that the disinfection was autonomous for clinical care, but those drones flying next to buildings and slightly inside the overhangs of a subway, those were all teleoperation. And then delivery, it was autonomous, but it was autonomous under conditions that we don't have right now. Telehealth, teleoperation, because the point isn't to automate health. I mean, I was pretty clear if my dad had been sick, you came at him with a robot and there's not a person talking to him or anything like that, he wasn't going to put up with it. And they found that out in Italy, where one of the robots, they actually started thwacking. The old people were like hitting at it when it came by, saying, where's the doctor? So, but teleoperation is there to protect the healthcare workers to have a good interaction, to enable them to be humane and to do those things. So that's important. If you look at morphology, there were a lot of humanoid robots among the ground robots. There were a lot of robots with manipulators. There were very few humanoids with manipulators. So basically you had things that looked human, kind of that social engineering, kind of cutesy look, not necessarily form, fit, function. So that's interesting to think about. Another thing that we popped out in year 1 is there were 61 explicit cultural and ethical concerns. So some of the legal things. So public safety 1, yay team. Public safety used those drones. People were worried about privacy. They were worried about unwarranted surveillance. They were worried about ethics, things. Clinical care, an interesting, with some of the cases and things like, you're certainly worried about privacy, you're worried about, but there's the idea of unproven claims of effectiveness. So the disinfection robots, big win, right? So everybody wanted them. A lot of countries now, you can't ramp up. The 2 major companies, one here in Texas and one in Denmark, couldn't ramp up fast enough. So what's the solution? We'll build our own. I mean, how hard is it to put some lights on a mobile base? Well, the lights aren't just lights. They have reflectors, there's a duration of time, there's all these sorts of things. So you can, one sweep, you can violate intellectual property law and you can get it wrong. So that wasn't, that's something to worry about, right? It's like if you have a gap, do you want rapid manufacture? How do you protect these things so you can catch it from both sides? All right, let's see what happened in year 2. So in year 2, so now this is the overall through there for the year 2. Now let's look at that slightly and see that 80 instances in 25 countries. So before we had seen in year 1, 340 instances now. So we're not getting as many news reports. We're mostly getting scientific, the novelty has gone down, but still there. But anyway, those are the 25 countries. So you can see some things like Russia, things have dropped out there. But what was interesting is we got 5 new countries, and mostly in the East and Middle East. So that's also an interesting thing to look at. We're looking at it from diffusion of innovation. And looking internationally, you started out strong, you kept on going strong. Okay? Singapore had been tied with Thailand. It was just, in year 1, and then Thailand slightly pulled ahead. But the US, China, India, Italy, the big players just in there. So there is something to be said in terms of policy if your country, and this also is related to whether or not you had a national robotics policy. So that helps to see how useful this is going to be for your country. Now, if we look in terms of the change in year 2, just year 1 versus year 2, not overall, you see that the clinical care went down, the public safety proportionally went down, but continuity of work bumped up. And that kind of makes sense. We've survived. We've got the public health crisis sort of under control. But what about us? This is getting old. What's in it for us? What do we do? How do we get our lives back? And so that kind of makes sense, right? And then, and I like to think of the total lack of non-hospital care as a stunning graphic admission that in the United States, which was, in China, we don't care about old people, whatever. Nursing homes, forget it. All right. What's also interesting is that there were no new use cases. We didn't see as many instances, some use cases had none, but we didn't see anything different in our clustering happen. So the big cases were the big cases, the disinfecting, the delivery, the telepresence. But what we did see, again, with those use cases is the shift to regular people. So instead of public safety and clinical care, which had been 1 and 2, continuity and work and education popped up to 1, moving public safety and clinical care to 1 to 2 and 3. Now, if you look at the international trends throughout the 2 years, let's see, hopefully, let's see if the cursor works. Yes. Okay, so this is the epi curve, right? So you can see how and then it's gotten really bad. But here's through year 1. And this is not surprising. The first month right here is March. This is right when we're getting the pandemic declared. Everybody gets interested. And look, all the different domains: public safety, clinical care, continuity of work and education, laboratory automation, pulling a blank on the other 2. But anyway, isn't it interesting? It wasn't, first we're going to get a spike in clinical care because the healthcare workers, and then, we've got to do the lockdowns. So now we're going to get a spike in public health, and then we're going to get this. And then it's like interesting, the diversity of solutions that got adopted immediately within the first 3 months. And then we see, and not terribly surprising, within a month or 2, we've started to plateau. What you had, and this gets into technical maturity, which is a whole nother talk about technical maturity, but the majority of 73% of the robots used in the first year were existing robots being used in normal ways that just nobody had bought a bunch of them or put into service for this. So there wasn't a lot of innovation going on. It was like, those disinfectant robots have been used up in Dallas. Let's buy them now, quick, buy them. We should be using them too. Those types of decisions are what we're seeing. Same thing with the drones. We're seeing a lot of that. But then notice what happens. Continuity of work and education starts off kind of slow, and then it but it's got a really good derivative, right? It's got a slope there going. More than anybody else of the other domains really isn't tailing off as fast as these other ones had. So that's something to keep in mind. If we compare with year 1 and year 2 in terms of modality, about the same. Public safety, lots of UAV, still lots of UAVs. The blue is for UAV, brown, the little brown side is a proportionate for ground robots, and then the goldy silvery is for water. Right, so clinical care, more ground robots. Continuity, a little bit more ground robots, but still about the same. What we do see a surprise is in quality of life, all of a sudden we're starting to get ground robots. And that may be because of a product latency effect. That ground robots are harder to get, they're more expensive, so the investment, more lag time, more lead time on those. And so that there could be something to investigate there. So to recap, year 1, we saw public safety led clinical care in numbers, but we had, even in year 1, a very surprising amount of public sector use. Public safety, clinical care, government are highly regulated institutional uses. Teleoperation was as valuable as full autonomy. And teleoperation, not because we can do autonomy, but teleoperation is because we wanted remotely to act remotely and be engaged in that loop. Public safety use of drones, ethical concerns and environmental concerns. And in year 2, leaders of adoption kept on adopting. The private sector use grew even more, and the ground robot use increased, again, possibly with that. So what does that mean? So we're looking at the year 2 data now. So we're hoping to get more analysis of that out the door soon. But hopefully that gives some idea of what happened with COVID and robots. But who cares? So what? What has this got to do with this? Well, I think the important things for us here in this workshop is that, first off, robots are happening. This is the first time we've seen public-private interest use robots. It's always been agencies or large companies over there. This is regular people go, yeah, delivery's okay, that's fine, right, we got it. You know, this is the first time we're seeing this, so this could be that inflection moment. And then the other one is that everything we're doing here in Texas, across all the things we saw this morning, the things on the list to talk about today, that is all relevant, and it's relevant what we work together on for disasters, works for pandemics, and I promise for Luis to add this in, for refugees, for that crisis, that's another crisis. And if you're interested in that, I'm on the committee for the Robotics Autonomous Automation Society Special Interest Group on Humanitarian Technology and the things that we can do there with robots to help with that. But the big thing is, it's all about Texas, what we can do and how we can contribute. So hopefully we can use this wonderful opportunity to work together.
All right, thank you, Robin, for the very nice talk and echoing the theme for TEROS. So let's see if we have a question. Oh, Jody.
Cool. This is a really nice overview of what happened in the robotics sphere when COVID happened. I was curious if you could share some insights on the effectiveness of these robots and how that changed over time.
We're trying to figure that out, and so there's analysis. Dr. Clendenin's group in public health, in particular, we're trying to concentrate on public health and public safety, since those were the 2 biggies, and to go back and see what the effectiveness were. And that's really hard. Public safety hates to put anything on the record, and okay, so remember that part about surveillance and privacy in the 61? Yeah, and most of that being, but well, many of those public safety has realized they don't want to talk about their drone use because it's a no-win scenario for them. But the clinical care, we're starting to see how they make their decisions and things and the effectiveness. And they were like, in the story goes something like this. Yeah, it was working for our sister hospital, but we had never gotten around to buying them. And then we bought them and we liked them. And of course, they're fine. They're using it. We're using them. Yeah, kind of thing. It's like, no big deal. Why are you bothering us with it? It was a no-brainer. So I think that's one thing to take away from it.
Thank you for the awesome talk, Professor Murphy. So what do you think could be like, other than the negative responding with robotics to deal the negative situations like COVID, pandemic, refugees? What do you think other than this could have like we could have a catalyst that could increase the uses of robot other than the negative situations like pandemics and stuff?
Well, I work in disasters, so that's always a negative, and you always want to try to prevent disasters, right? Pre-disaster mitigation is important as disaster response. Disaster response is sexier, right? Rescuing the baby or something there. So let's try it this way. So you saw that majority of the use was around disinfecting. And the hospital was all ground robots. Where did those ground robots start? They started with Ebola. During the Ebola crisis, we had the companies begin, how do we disinfect hospitals? Now, we didn't have hospitals get hit hard by Ebola. It was mostly confined to West Africa. We did, Texas, yay, we're number one, managed to take out not one, but 2 wards of their one of the hospitals up in Dallas with 1 person being infected. And so that hospital got really interested, and that was where Xenix came from. Well, by the time they had built the product, 18 months is your product development time. So by the time they had created the robot, pandemic was over. It burned itself out, had never jumped to more than a couple of hospitals. So there was but you know what? Hospitals every day have to deal with hospital-acquired infections. And that became the selling point. So 7 years later, when you get another pandemic, you've had these robots, they've already been in use for 7 years, people are comfortable with them. Some of the other ones may not have bought them, but they know they have friends, they have peers who have bought them. Very comfortable, becomes very easy to adopt them. So sneaking them into everyday use is the way to do it.
Luis, you are the next.
Very nice talk, Robin. Do you have data in Texas? How many hospitals, how many robots that were used? I don't recall to have seen many disinfection robots around during the high months of the pandemic. Do you have data on that?
You would not have seen them in a hospital. By definition, is when they're changing over the patients, right? Cleaning up the room, and you're not supposed to see the light, right? So you close the door and let it go, right? So you wouldn't see them. These are behind the scenes kind of robots. So no, we don't have data by Texas. Hospitals don't keep data that way. You can't even get a complete listing of how many beds are available by hospital. So it gets kind of amusing. So we don't have data on that, so sorry.
Right, thanks.
So I saw Peter raise a hand, and then Mitch next.
So just a quick question, Robin. This is a great sort of catalog of what was done, but presumably you probably have some intuition or thoughts on what wasn't done but should have been or could have been. What do you think are what was left on the table?
For me, the biggest concern coming out of all of this was the first response. And I was on this study, one of the National Academy studies about this. And the first response is, oh, we should build lots of robots now and put them in a locker. And when the next pandemic, we'll just unlock the locker, send them out, and we'll have everything. And it's like, yeah, because that's worked so well with the nuclear industry in the past. And, 10 years later, nobody even knows how to turn it on, right? And how many have a 7-year-old cell phone? Anyone? You are an unusual person. Good for you. Not the way to bet. All right. So these are all software. They're constantly upgrading. There's always that. So just try that. It's not going to be the things you use every day are the things you use during a pandemic. All the ones we were showing that got immediately adopted were already in use, already existed. They were heritage. 73% of the robots were heritage, meaning they were already being used standard for there. Very few of the engineering that you were doing is like, oh, we've got this turtle bot, let's put a tray on it. That's not exactly a high risk modification. So we want to, my fear is that we're either going to try to cache things and miss that and not try to get things into everyday use, or we're going to say, well, what we need to do is innovate, because these weren't actually used. There were only 2 robots that actually did that. You know, like you want a robot to do a nose swab and you want to do contact. And in those cases, those robots were already being done as part of research with a hospital. And even then, I'm pretty clear, putting my head in a vise and having a robot swab my nose versus the little telepresence robot, maybe not Spot with an iPad, which is just freaking creepy, right? Come in, nurse talks to me, tells me, pick up the, yes, you're holding the swab the right way, put it in your, no, I'm counting to 15, keep it in there, doctor, no, in there, you know, and turn around, do the other one, is so much more humane than, I'll hold you down, put stuff in your nose. Yeah, and don't worry, it won't go back to your brain. Yeah,
Hey,
and that's gonna work.
Hey, Robin, this is related to Peter's question. The large numbers and the trends are very interesting, but I'm wondering if there were any one-offs or underappreciated or emergent applications you saw in the single off items that we should be aware of that has a lot of potential.
I think the biggest missed potential, and now I'm coming back to, there's clearly a latency in my responses here on answering Peter's question. The missed opportunity was really to do the laboratory automation. One of the biggest initial problems with testing is that you had to have technicians test. You both had to have facilities, and then you had to have technicians. And then, okay, that doesn't sound hire people. Well, except you have to have them certified by the FDA. And then so you start getting this huge back trail of things, and so you can't rapidly absorb. So why can't you automate the laboratory analysis? And even better, why can't we give the doctors, this is what they asked for in Ebola, a laboratory automation in a box? So as you take the sample, you know, the cart that the phlebotomist takes around, you know, that cart now has at least shove it in there and it starts doing a little something. Not like Theranos, but you know, something that actually works, right? But I mean, how hard, those were things that were doable, feasible, instead of like, oh, we're gonna take the sample and then we're going to drive it 30 miles across town. You know, so I think that was the one that, and with the certification of the individuals is really tough. So I think that was a big one.
Okay, I think, yeah, the last question, please.
All right, so like quick question. So do you have any insights on how the cost of these robots affected the applications and the countries they were deployed in?
Cost was certainly a factor. In the case of the cloning, the most common excuse was we can't afford it. Not excuse, I mean, I'm sure it was true, they couldn't afford it. The other thing, all the drones that were doing the nasty violations of privacy and yelling at people, those cost about, $1,000 to at most $2,000. So those are really cheap and easy to use, and we're sure that explains why they got used so much. There was no downside. They were cheap, they were easy, you had them. To do it, if something bad happened, you only, you know, you're still in petty cash for most agencies, and so that probably played a role in the pervasiveness of it. So, yeah. Well, we're out of time.
Wonderful.
Here, so.
I saw still some hands up, but we are running out of time, so please catch up with Robin in the coffee sessions if you're interested. And so let's thank Robin again for the wonderful talk.